Okay. Well, hello everyone, and welcome. So it's my pleasure to be able to speak to you all today, and I'm really honoured by some of the people that have taken their time to listen to me today. And we're going to take a deep dive into threat intelligence for sUAS and how it can be an immense benefit both to counter UAS programs, law enforcement, investigations, and counter UAS product development. So for those of you who maybe don't know me, my name is Mike. I'm the CTO and founder at DroneSec. We are a cyber UAV security and intelligence company, and you may have seen us around with our weekly threat intel and a few frameworks we've created here and there. So we've been around since 2016, focusing on UAV security within some services, but also focusing on that threat intelligence piece and incident response within drones. So my background is in intelligence and cybersecurity, so you may see me make a few comparisons to information security for good reason. And let's get on with the rest of the talk. So today we're going to dive into how UAS threat intelligence can really inform threat modeling, both for sites as well as the process of collecting that threat intelligence and what a typical UAS threat actor might look like. We'll then jump into some of the tangible benefits of having a threat intel platform and why the AI, ML, machine learning type of decision making for counter UAS scenarios might be quite important for future counter UAS and the threat intelligence that it derives it from. So the first key here is threat modeling, and you have to understand the threat model side of it before we can go into the intelligence gathering. And for us, one question we've always asked ourselves when doing a red team or a simulation or analysis of a counter UAS system is how to conduct an effective simulation that mirrors realistic threat actors. And so we want to accurately represent what an adversary in the field might look like when they're using different equipment for nefarious purposes. We want to know what their TTPs are, and you really want to build up a database of every single UAS incident and categorize it and baseline it to a point where we can very quickly search it up and attribute it to a specific threat actor. So once we have all those different characteristics of a threat actor, then we can replicate their equipment in a realistic scenario and a methodology against counter UAS. So this means that counter UAS are kept up to pace. They have to build honest, good tech that can defend against the threats that we want them to stop. And today I'm going to document some of our journey from coming up with this idea of an internal database or tool for our red teaming, which ended up being more available for others outside of the organization because of that threat intelligence model and how it helps different things. So let's discuss the risk assessments themselves. Threat intelligence is extremely important for UAS because we don't really have the ease and flexibility of deploying countermeasures without sometimes a slew of regulatory and cost prohibitive measures, right? Kind of like the cybersecurity and the physical security worlds are not yet combined into that emerging tech. And I'll go into why that is. But in terms of cybersecurity, if you have a threat or a piece of malware on your network, within about 5 to 10 minutes, you can purchase and deploy an antivirus system and evade that malware or get around it. And I think that's quite interesting because it's a very short amount of time and actually at quite a low cost point at the moment. But it's not that simple with counter UAS or sites that are modeled around protecting against UAS. I haven't yet to found a counter UAS vendor that can purchase, install, and deploy and start protecting against UAS within the flight time of a battery of a UAS, which is roughly 30 minutes. And I realize that's quite near impossible, but that's what we're dealing with is how quickly can we react to a UAS threat if we don't have a system in place? And if we do, then what are we doing wrong if a UAS is in the area? And another kind of part of the traditional threat modeling and how it's different is, we've often looked at the consequence versus likelihood is risk. And with cyber physical systems, the impact is heightened. It's unknown. We don't understand yet how to protect against it. And just the threat of drones alone is quite a formidable tactic. If someone was to threaten an airport with the the threat of a sighting, it's still enough to shut down an airport because those airplanes can't be in the same airspace as a drone and risk threat to life. So there's not so much of a proof of concept needed for UAS. It's simply just the threat that is brought into that area. So you could potentially hold an airspace ransom by claiming there is a UAS in the area. And so when you're modeling for UAS, you need to stick to that potential threat itself. And the difference between cybersecurity is that we've mapped out all these advanced persistent threats or APTs, and it's not the same with UAS. We can sometimes see incidents occurring, but there's no real way to baseline that, see how they react, unless you've got plenty of logging or documentation, which is your drone detection system. So we're going to go into how that plays out and how that can go hand in hand with something like threat intelligence. So digital and physical security controls, as I mentioned, they're very similar. And when you have a physical site, often if it's somewhere you want to secure or protect, you're probably going to have some CCTV in there or some human security guards. And it's the same with digital networks. You're going to have server logging. You're going to use that to tell the story of what happened when there was malware in your network. And when it comes to UAS, it's hard to make sure that you have that RF and wireless spectrum logging all the time, as well as operators present to maintain the device and also deploy the countermeasures if need be, if that's the type of mechanism you have. And so in areas where you don't necessarily have counter UAS yet, or it's not so much of a mitigation, it's only detection, threat intelligence can be a great way to bridge that gap and baseline it, to try and know what you're going to expect and to derive some intelligence from those adversaries that you're trying to protect against. So let's kind of dive into what that looks like and how that would all work. So really, from the baseline, what is threat intelligence? Well, it's a way of storing data and feeding it back to the people and the stakeholders and the systems that need it most. And this is to defeat those adversaries, whether that's in the future or looking at investigating something that happened in the past. So we ourselves perform this with a certain methodology as the process, and then we feed that information through a threat intelligence platform, which is a way of automating it, removing that signal to noise ratio, and creating visualizations for those little connections, and really, cataloging it all together. So when it comes to UAS threat intelligence, you want it to be accurate, timely, and you want to provide it to those, whether they're in law enforcement or they're the people on the ground who are utilizing that counter UAS system itself. So the way we really do it is we collect it from a variety of sources. It goes through a human for triage based on the type of prioritization. We then categorize and index it based on the characteristics of the incident and put it through dissemination for supplying onto the platform to those who need it. So one kind of key thing I want to bring up is there's been a fair amount of discussion around national counter UAS systems or interconnected national counter UAS system. And I find it very interesting, and I've got some insights as to why that may or may not work. And one of those keys that we see is there is a lot of competition around counter UAS. There's a lot of proprietary information and technology that goes into them, which is great. And so there is a bit of restriction around how one system might become a national counter UAS network. However, it doesn't necessarily restrict multiple counter UAS systems from feeding into a national intelligence sharing system or data sharing system. And that's where it can connect data feeds to counter UAS systems, to law enforcement, and allow them all to ingest and feed off that data. The other thing, or the good bit about threat intelligence, is that it can be local, national, global. It can be per type of environment or even per threat actor, which means, when it's difficult for a counter UAS vendor to necessarily create a system unique to every single environment, if they utilize threat intelligence to infer the product development for that environment, it can be done. And so you can take a generic or typical system and modify it based on the threat intel available to you for that system, for that environment, or for that area. So that's another key is that it can be utilized on many different types of layered systems, and it's adjustable that way. And the last thing, and I think this is more of a lesson learned not to utilize as we go ahead with the presentation, is that threat intelligence shouldn't just be used as a way of looking at realistic UAS threat scenarios or trying to prepare for future incidents. It should actively characterize and describe the threat actor as in depth as possible to be able to find those vulnerabilities and be able to make it very hard for nefarious use of UAS in future. Raise that barrier of entry and almost saturate it to the point where there's enough logging or databasing or indexing there that it makes threat actors think twice about actually doing that. Or if they do commit to an action, the intelligence there is able to jump on it very, very quickly. And so that's some kind of great actors or actions around it. Now, it's quite interesting because, obviously when we're building our own threat intelligence platform, a lot of this big data came to us and we're trying to figure out the different nuances of how it all works and how we recognize those patterns and display them. And one way that I've kind of come to realize that it's similar in a way to is the Singapore method of contact tracing. And this happened because we were in Singapore during the air show at the time, and they had a very comprehensive method of tracking a COVID patient's journey, right? So they looked at where they went, who they touched, who they met, and then they would try to predict who would go there next. And so that if they were able to predict it, they could also prevent it. And so this creates a few different data points. And for me, that's a form of threat intelligence. And so we see it in a very similar fashion for UAS. If you have multiple different data points, and you can connect them all together, whether it's independent sightings, whether it's feeds from counter-UAS or detection systems. It might be videos or social media images of that same event and matching that with manufacturer information. Sometimes you can put a picture together that answers a lot of previous unanswered questions. And there's many uses for this. You can inform SOPs for organizations that don't have counter-UAS. You can keep that threat actor kind of evolving and live, tracking all their characteristics to create great red team scenarios. And you can feed this into your war rooms or tabletop exercises if you have a client that is trying to figure out what their number one threat actor might be. Post incident, it's a great way of going back and being able to link it all together and find out new information. And we'll get into a little bit of that soon as well when we talk about some of the social media sources. So it goes without saying that, UAS are cyber physical systems. They're connected to the internet. They have many of the same capabilities and attack vectors as computers. They can download firmware from the web and apply that. They can grab geofence details from a server. They can even just share videos live to Facebook as they're flying. And so when we look at our data sources, yes, we have the aviation authorities and you have different sources that might be from the news and media and law enforcement and contributions and active counter-UAS systems. But you also have to consider social media and web search engines and places that chatter might happen. And this is because there may be evidence or indicators online that actually link back to a UAS event or incident, whether it's going to happen or whether it is something that happened before. And so to track something like this, you have a very large database of keywords. And for your own database, you should have a number of both acronyms and built out words which can be translated into different languages for mapping that out. And you match those with a bunch of variations. So you may want to pair UAS or RPAS with exploit if you're protecting your fleet of your own. You may want to pair, say, Michigan Stadium with RPAS and be able to search that on Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, Snapchat, whatever, to be able to see if anyone's flying drones around there, which might match with a system you have. And there's a lot of customization you can do here, and AI helps with that immensely. It takes out that signal to noise ratio, and you really want to be focusing on the important ones such as weaponization, contraband smuggling, surveillance, threat to safety. And so I want to kind of demonstrate how powerful social media tracking as part of that threat intelligence might be in terms of real world scenarios. And I'm going to go through two of them, and both of them are examples. So take them just with a grain of salt. They were real incidents, but they're completely redacted, and they're the images will differ for what happened. And in the first incident, we had a video appear on Twitter. It matched one of our German language keywords of drone, and it matched airport as well. And we noticed that from the metadata and the image of the video supplied, that it was an airport that we were aware of. Not only were we aware of that airport, but we were aware they had a counter-UAS system in place from the 3rd of May. And so being able to match that and catalog that metadata of the image, you should line them up and start asking some questions such as, why is there a UAS in this area? You know, were they able to bypass the counter UAS system? Were they simply out of range of the counter UAS system? Was it turned off or not engaged? Or you know, simply was it a legal UAS flight and they were posting images that they were simply allowed to post? And so this is a great way of taking that information back to, say, the counter UAS vendor or the airport or the stakeholders to be able to say, here is evidence of something not going right. Let's compare that to your detection logs or telemetry logs and compare the pair and find out what happened, uplift and identify that. Another example is, you know, for example, the focus that some people have on the cybersecurity angle of drone systems. Again, this is just an example, and it's something that was brought up on a platform that detects different drones. Now, for us, it's not so much the issue of this occurring, it's the fact that if this system is in place protecting critical infrastructure somewhere, then we need to make them aware of it, just as it is with responsible disclosure and areas where vulnerabilities are found and you want to be able to make the good guys aware of it, especially when it's made public along those lines. So as part of this, some of our keywords cover things like common counter UAS systems or detection systems or drone systems. And so the position we take is, if you were imagining you were a bank robber, the very first thing you would try to do is find known issues or vulnerabilities in the systems you're trying to defeat, such as the bank alarms. And so for counter UAS or UAS actors, threat actors, they're probably going to be looking at how to bypass some of these drone systems. They may use canary drones. They might use different ways of you know, defeating them via the networks or via physical means. But they're probably, if they know a detection or mitigation solution is in place, are going to try and bypass that. And so this is an example of being able to find something, alert the people who need to be alerted so that they can be aware of that kind of issue that might be happening. And this is the same for discovering, you know, leaked databases or websites that provide information to UTM or drone analytics servers and databases. It goes down the same route of they just need to be aware of things like this. And social media dragnetting can be a great way of doing that. So in terms of what the process might look like for collecting evidence or intelligence from, say, an artifact, let's get a seemingly innocuous one. We want to break down an incident to its various components, and then we want to log it in a database, which means it can be extracted and analyzed later on. So we start by tagging an incident. And if you see in the top center of your screen, there was an illegal drone that flew over a jockey race. The operator was found and caught by security personnel. And so we'll use a various number of means to try and break this down. One of those is tagging. And right down the bottom of your screen, you'll see that we've tagged it with seizure because the drone system was seized. It happened to the public. It resulted in apprehension. It was trespass. It occurred with a sport, and it happened in Hong Kong. And we can continue down by looking at the geolocation of both the area and its region, Southeast Asia Pacific. We can look if there's any individuals involved with that threat actor group, as well as any kind of interesting characteristics that came out of the investigation, such as the serial number, the make and model of the drone, any forensic data, or even CCTV from the event. And so once we extract the actual time of the event, we can start mapping them with other pieces of intelligence we received via social media. That drone may have been seen by someone else as a sighting. It may have been seen on CCTV. And so the time is placed, the geolocation of the incident is placed as well. And the more images we build up of this incident, we can start removing those false positives. So we can confirm it was a DJI Mavic 2. 3 of the images clearly show that. The 4th image didn't really clearly show that. Let's go down that process of elimination to really figure out what it is. The other thing is the landing or takeoff point. The takeoff point was shown, and we were able to measure that to the drone's maximum range. So if the drone has a maximum range of 2 kilometers and it took off from 3 kilometers away, then there may have been some tweaking or modifying to that drone. We want to be aware of that. If not, well, it was just acting within its usual parameters. And this, of course, will change our threat model for that environment based on what we see with previous events. So based on some of the reports, we can see that there was also a statement issued that this isn't the first time something like this has happened. It's happened before at Happy Valley. And given the fact that it happened during a race, maybe we can start to infer there was some indicators that this threat actor might be, again, a repetitive actor, or it might just be a separate occasion. But in both occasions, it may have been used as a tool to spook a horse and cause a change in betting. Maybe it was just spying on the horses or taking a video of them. There's really a lot of middle ground until you start seeing some of those, repetitive events. But that's the point of threat intelligence, is continuing to collect that evidence until it actually provides as facts rather than just being random scenarios that have occurred. We can also drop down the line and try to figure out, how much financial backing was behind this group if they were a threat actor group. Did they take off from a boat versus did they just take off on the land? Was their drone system an expensive one with various equipment and components, or was it just a simple drone system? And so, we have all these data points. We can start to log this in a database. And so if law enforcement ever are looking for, say, incidents that occurred in Hong Kong, this will show up. If they're looking at incidents involving a DJI Mavic 2 system, it will also come up. If they pair that with, say, incidents in that timeline, or for example, incidents that only, result in the apprehension of the operator, these will now match. And you can dig that down quite to an extreme point. So if you wanted to try and look for trends in UAS invading races, you maybe do a search for that and try to figure out whether they were interconnected. In these three results here, you can see, well, there was one in the UK, one in the US, and one in Hong Kong. They're probably not related, but are there any trends we can tell between all three of them to better help racing arenas or areas that are taking place with races against UAS? The same can be said for widening our search. So if we want to look at all the incidents that are occurring in the areas around, even as far as, say, Singapore and Southeast Asia Pacific, we may find, say, the incident that occurred with the drugs drop between Malaysia and Singapore in between the strait there. And so we have a DJI Mavic 2 in this incident as well. Maybe we can try to make some inferences there. It's not very clear at this point, but you can continue tracking that to a point where you have hard factual evidence, and that will help that area. So the next thing kind of brings us into the threat actor glossary, and the reason for this is we were talking about maybe they're a part of a threat actor group. Are there any events to make sure that we're looking at the same actor? And so this is one undertaking that we took to make a living, breathing document where all incidents and artifacts that are clearly validated and linked to a threat actor are placed there along with their TTPs and their characteristics. So we only focus on some of the key things, as we're not looking for just the small stuff. We're looking for the interesting things that will cause a lot of pain and headache, such as weaponization with explosives as an armed drone device, contraband when they're carrying weapons or narcotics or smuggling that cash across the border, surveillance when it's used versus counter, law enforcement, or even, for example, the Christchurch mosque attacker when he used the drone to preempt or attack the specified target. And of course, you've even got canary drones where they send up a small example drone to test the waters and see if the area is clear before sending a larger, more expensive drone. And lastly, drones don't have to be the weapon. Obviously, these UAS can be sent up and indirectly be used to cause issues for flights. Just by being in the area, they could cause that kinetic harm to the passengers or the public. So the threat actor glossary and what it looks like is a bunch of different actors that have everything mapped to them. And this is an abridged version of one of those actors. For example, the India-Pakistan border rebel groups. There's been a number of these, and some of them can be mapped to public incidents. Many others are mapped to private incidents. But you can start seeing things such as, their goals here are to conduct surveillance. They want to do reconnaissance and they want to smuggle weapons and cash across the border to different rebel groups. You can see that they often actually recruit local youths and elderly into conducting some of those drone flights, or their takeoff and landing positions are very close proximity to border villages near the line of control. So looking at their equipment they use, looking at the type of operations they do, how can we start looking at how to defeat these guys and really look into that and think, what are their vulnerabilities? How could you stop this from occurring with UAS? And of course, linking any event or incident that occurs to them once it's been validated. So continuing on with why that's important and getting all these threat actors together, it's making it available in a searchable database, which is a step closer to allowing it to be interconnected, whether you have law enforcement trying to link into that or counter UAS systems. And a key reason, and this is something I've mentioned a few times before, is that we see more and more of these UTM, UAS systems needing or requiring counter-UAS to be integrated into them, allowing the good drones whilst keeping out the bad. And that merge with counter-UAS, it may not take place in the areas where they want just forced stop protection for counter-UAS, but in smart cities and the places where the money really matters, they're probably going to be integrating the two. And so there's a number of decisions that they make when they're utilizing AI to do this. And back in 2017, Kevin Finister introduced the Dream model, where it had a bunch of different characteristics of a drone when facing ICS, and various models of that are still used in AI today. And so, when a drone system or a counter drone system is trying to make a decision, it might look at the size of the drone, the range, the geolocation, it might look at the payload capacity, and all of those are tiered up to try and decide, should we let this drone in or not? And on an occasion where there hasn't been any recent events, the system may allow that drone to enter. But where threat intelligence can play a huge role is if it matches it to 3 separate events that have occurred in the same geolocation with a similar type of drone or signature of drone, that may cause it to make a decision based on AI to prevent that drone from entering the area, which will be pretty crucial when you've got the different makes and models and drone types trying to operate under the one model itself. And so, there's a number of different things we can do, but I think that the threat intelligence side, once you collect enough information, can infer both on, major no-fly zones for UAM when they're doing planning for cities. It can help you determine the best VIP travel path because you can combine that drone detection logging with incidents, place that crossover on top of that telemetry data and determine where those incidents are occurring and why. And some of the key things are that for purchases of counter UAS, they often ask, how do we know that the system is going to stay on top of the emerging threats or be able to take all that into consideration? And that threat intelligence of seeing different incidents and looking towards them and trying to focus on that is a great way of doing it. Similarly with law enforcement, if they're trying to prepare a forensic kit or a response kit, they want to know what 80% of the threats are to start with that as covering the majority. Maybe they're say DJI systems 80%. They'll get a threat intelligence analysis done and see that they can predict most of their future incidents will be DJI. And then they might look at the 20% else and say, well, AUTOL is risk. Let's prepare something like that in a lesser form. And so it does help that kind of decision-making process. So there's some key, really ideas or items that come out of threat intelligence that you can keep adding to a single element and item. And I realize I don't have too much time, so I'll kind of try to get through this as quickly as I can. But you can start asking questions of an area, whether there is logging or not in terms of drone detection, such as, where did the drone come from? How did it actually enter the perimeter? Why wasn't it engaged? How was it able to stay in here for so long? Was there a swarm? Did it employ counter drone measures? And looking at its intentions. And if you don't necessarily have that telemetry data being captured and being analyzed, then you're going to have to rely on some other gap analysis to be able to do that. What are those other sources that might be able to tell you what the drone was doing in the area? And of course, you see many different items that relate to that, whether they had a robbery 2 weeks after a drone was in the area, or maybe they had a counter UAS system that was disabled by other means for seemingly innocuous reasons, but it coincided with a UAS attributed event. These are really important. They should inform your counter UAS operations all the time. So as we kind of near the end of the presentation, I just want to really state that we're seeing a few of these cybersecurity controls that exist with signature matching, heuristics, feeding through threat intelligence, trying to feed off those APTs and determine what the threat is within the counter-drone space. Already Kaspersky and BlackBerry Cylance are getting into this area, and more with the emergence of UTM systems combining with counter-UAS, you're going to see these countermeasures coming off of allowing the good while disabling the bad. And so, with that, you're probably going to see some cyber physical systems or kinetic counter UAS systems informed by decisions made based on these digital systems or taking the learnings from the cybersecurity angle. So it's going to be quite an interesting field to watch in the next kind of 2 to 5 years. And I think, in terms of that pre-fact for threat intelligence. If it informs you what incidents are going on around you, you can focus on those for something that might come next. And of course, if something does happen as an incident and you've got all those sources and data available, you can then feed that back into the investigation and what your counter UAS system should focus on next in terms of product development. So really, in summary, and obviously the mission of DroneSec is to focus on the innovation of drones without having the restrictions on the usual hobbyist commercial UAS. And the threat intelligence can narrow this focus by looking at the really bad stuff, the threat actors who are out there to do harm, and focus on the remediations for those, not just your small, maybe not consistently bad threats. And so that's where we want to focus on, is not having that dragnet of sweeping restrictions, and also just trying to baseline all of those TTPs for threat actors. Give your counter UAS system effectiveness based on knowing who it's up against, not just trying to guess the market or which drone manufacturer will put out systems that will be purchased. If you understand the threat actor and their financial modeling and how much they can afford and the types of systems they employ in the areas that they operate, it's much easier to try and figure out what you should focus on. We absolutely realize there will be new joint capabilities of information sharing between both the physical and the cybersecurity angles coming into counter UAS, because they want to share that information to law enforcement. And with the different systems out there, it's going to be quite an interesting task trying to see how that's allowed with business competition and so forth. But this is a continued request that we hear, is that users of counter UAS, they want to see the intelligence coming in to baseline their systems versus what's happening out there, or how do we actually continue to improve on this. They want to have good realistic scenarios of what's actually happening out there. They want to be able to raise the barrier of entry for guys. The fact they've got a counter UAS system doesn't mean they want to be able to defeat a whole bunch of incidents. They just want to reduce incidents from occurring in their operational perimeter and assets. And of course, what they want to focus on, building good products that can defeat future issues. So I have gone a little bit over time, and that is it for me today. And I hope you're all able to take something away from it, whether it is for your own internal teams, maybe you're on your counter UAS journey and looking for a system that fits right for you, or maybe just in general, you are a counter UAS provider and you want to look at how threat intelligence can help infer that going forward. So I personally would love to hear from you, and whether you have any questions for me, you can reach me at that email, or we'll see you at one of our upcoming events. And just personally, I want to thank the IDGA organizers for having us here. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference, even though it's during COVID, and hope you all stay safe and well. And I look forward to getting some questions and conversation from you. Thank you.